electric vehicle charging points in communities in Herefordshire. I'm Rosie Wilmot. I'm an officer in the Sustainability and Climate Change team at Herefordshire Council. I'll be facilitating this session today. The info will be delivered by Belinda Wilson, the Council's Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Officer. Belinda is leading on the projects that are bringing more publicly available electric vehicle charge points to the county, with support from other members of the Sustainability and Climate Change team, including Lydia Critchley, who's on the call with us today, and who many of you already have been contacted by. Belinda, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rosie. Coming through loud and clear, hopefully. Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks for joining this webinar today. I'll just go over a little bit of sort of why we're doing this and what we're looking to cover. The council wants to support those that are interested in swapping over to electric vehicles in that, and obviously community groups have expressed interest in charge point infrastructure, which is a key part of facilitating the swap over to EVs. So we thought we'd put this webinar together really to give some background information about electric vehicles in general and electric vehicles in Herefordshire. We'd also have a look through council projects that are currently going on, and then we move into thinking about actual, if you're considering charge points at your village halls or community centres, what kind of things do you need to consider as part of that? We've also got some information on case studies where charge points have actually been installed in community centre, village hall car parks, and then also some suggested next steps. Even if you're not ready to install, or you're only just thinking about it, or you've not even thought about it and you're coming at this very fresh, then there's a few things that you can, suggested things that you can look at to sort of help you move forward. So just a bit of very basic background. There's lots of different types of electric vehicle, a lot of different descriptions, and it can be a bit difficult to know what the actual difference is. When we refer to electric vehicles as we go through this webinar, what we're talking about is the battery electric vehicles. They only run on battery electric. They don't have any other form of power. So the shorthand for those is BEV, BEV, and that's the ones when we refer to an electric. When we refer to an electric vehicle, we're referring to a battery electric vehicle. There are other types, extended range vehicles. That's where they're primarily battery, but they have a small petrol engine to charge the battery up. You've got plug-in hybrids where they do actually plug in and they can run fully electric, but they also have petrol engines. And then the hybrid electric vehicles, which you can't plug in, and the battery kind of tops up the petrol rather than the other way around. And those last three on the list are the ones that are included in the ban that will come in 2035, along with petrol and diesel. So, as I say, going forward, when we talk about EVs, we're really talking about the ones that are purely battery electric. So to give some context in terms of numbers, currently in the UK, there's about 1.2 million electric vehicles that are owned and used. And in Herefordshire, as of the start of 2024, we're just under the 2,000 mark. Now, those will be sort of newly registered vehicles, but obviously you've got a second-hand market which is starting to develop now, and we're expecting that to contribute significantly to the proportion of EVs on the road. So although the new ones actually will be increasing, you will also find that the second-hand market starts to develop. But at the moment, what we're finding, so at the moment we've sort of gone through the first adopters, which is people who have an interest in EVs and probably have off-road parking so they can charge at home. That represents a large number of the initial drivers. Now what we're finding is that fleet are getting a lot more involved, and so business fleet electric vehicles are actually a big proportion of new registrations in the UK. So as you can see from those numbers, only 28,000 of the 133,000 that were registered this year were for private buyers. All the others are business and fleet. So to support electric vehicle rollout, one of the big issues has been charging infrastructure. Obviously, for those who've got off-street parking. There's the opportunity or possibility of putting home chargers and charging at home. For people who don't have that, it's more complicated. And also, if you're travelling distances because of the range of vehicles, the chances are you're going to need a top-up charge or charging en route. And numbers of charge points are now starting to increase. To give an indication, in Herefordshire, the publicly available charge points, we were looking at 104 as of July. Now, obviously, those aren't all provided by the council, but the majority are provided elsewhere. But that's looking at publicly available charge points in Herefordshire. We don't have any statistics on home chargers. We can't access those, but we can access statistics for publicly available. And there's various models made suggesting what may be needed based on what was originally the 2030 ban, and national statistics predict we're going to need about 1,500 chargers. So that's quite a big leap in Herefordshire. And obviously we're working towards supporting that and trying to increase charge point provision where we can. The other issue with Herefordshire is that obviously there's concerns about gaps in rural areas. You can see the two maps on the side there were taken from ZapMap, and they give an indication of what charge points are in the county and the city at the moment. And there's some quite big areas in the rural areas where there are gaps, and obviously potentially village halls and community centres could help with that. So just a quick run through current council projects, because Herefordshire Council obviously has a role to play in supporting the switch to EV. We're committed to supporting that, and one of the early decisions that was made by the council was that we could do that by offering up our car parks for charge point installation. So we currently have a contract with a company called Winea for expanding the network in council car parks. We had a small network that was installed about 10 years ago with government funding, and we're now working with Winea to expand that, and also importantly to put more rapid charge points in our car parks. And I don't know any of you that know Leominster or go to Leominster. There's a new installation there with a 100 kilowatt charger in it, which is proving very popular actually. The other main project, so that's car parks, off-street parking. The other main project is the local electric vehicle infrastructure scheme, which the government launched, I think it was back in 2022. And that is intended to support on-street charge point provision, particularly to support those people who don't have access to off-street parking, and it will not be easy, if not impossible, to actually charge from your own property. You're going to have to use public charging. So a pilot project was launched first, and the council was part of a consortium which was successful in bidding for money. And we're currently working on that contract, and we're hoping to start installing some on-street charge points later this year into early next year. And then a main fund was launched, which is intended, it's significantly more money, and the intention is that will considerably expand the on-street provision throughout the county. So we're currently looking at finalising procurement for that, hoping installs will begin next year. We're working with a consortium of local authorities on that as well, to make the whole thing more attractive to bidders if we've got a mix of sort of urban and rural. So that's the main council projects at the moment in terms of us actually delivering and installing infrastructure. And then looking at the bigger picture, so that was the initial discussion was, well, look, we've got car parks, let's put some infrastructure in those. We then said, okay, we need to look at the bigger picture. How do we take this forward? And there's lots of other ways in which the council can support the rollout, looking at things like licensing and planning and various other internal mechanisms that the council has, and also working with consortiums and things like that. So it's very much a new and expanding field. We adopted our strategy in May this year, which, as I say, gives a slightly bigger picture than just looking at, okay, let's put charge points in car parks and on street, looking at the roles the council has, working with stakeholders, and that's on the Herefordshire Council website if anyone would like to look at that. So as well as, obviously, we're looking at council car parks and we're looking at highways land, which council has control over, but there is the possibility, obviously, for public chargers to be installed on other land. We refer to it as third-party land. Village halls and community centres are examples of those. Obviously, this is something we've looked at. There's various different models. Some parts of the country have already explored ways in which they can support parish councils and other groups to have charge points installed. It's quite problematic, but there are things that you can look at in the short term to see what might work for you. So there's a large number of charge point operators out there. There is a list on the government website of sort of authorised installers and suppliers. And some of them are talking about offering fully or partly funded models for community chargers. So what that basically means is that they would install a charge point on your land or on the parish council land car park, fully funded. So they would pay for it, supply it, install it, manage it, run it, and be responsible for the maintenance. So that's one way of looking at it. And some parish councils have been successful in looking at that. We'll look later at the kind of issues that come up. It's not always that straightforward, but there is that opportunity. And there are other business models as well. Obviously, there's a possibility of some government funding, which we'll look at later, and sort of partly funded models. But one of the things we would encourage you to do, and we did write to a number of the parish and town councils who we've already been in contact with about possible Levi funding, which we weren't able to pursue, is, do contact operators directly and discuss options with them, because they are out there and they are looking for locations for their charge points. So that's an important point to make. And I'll pick up on the detail of some of that a bit later. So as part of this process of thinking, okay, what sort of charge points might we want, it's important to know that there are the different types. And these are very broad categories, and they do keep sort of being tweaked slightly, but they're basically the same as they're basically acknowledged as the same. So slow chargers are traditionally ones where you're going to need to charge overnight, 8 hours plus. So they tend to be overnight chargers, some sort of street lamp chargers, even 3-pin plugs. People have charged with 3-pin plugs and things like that, and they're very slow charging. Fast chargers, which are the ones that we already had in the council car park, 7 kilowatt, they're your sort of traditional fast charger. You can get a reasonable charge in a few hours, but you are looking at a few hours. So they tend to be suitable for destinations like, as I say, town centre car parks. We've got the 7 kilowatt ones and 22s now in our car parks. And then you've got rapid chargers, which will deliver a charge much more quickly to a vehicle, depending on the battery and the speed at which they can take it. But generally, rapid chargers deliver charge more quickly. And they tend to be in areas where you're not going to be parked for long periods of time. I mean, yes, perhaps an hour or so, but certainly not several hours. And then you've got the ultra rapid, and they're putting more and more categories in now because chargers are getting so fast that they're having to come up with new names. But as a big catch-all, ultra rapid is anything above around 100 kilowatts, and those are the very quick turnarounds. I mean, we've got 30 minutes there, but there's some really fast chargers that can do it in 10. And they tend to be the ones on the motorways and the trunk roads. So the motorway network, for those of you that travel and notice EV chargers, they are becoming a lot more available now, and they tend to be the very fast ultra rapid chargers. So the ones we've boxed there in red are the ones more likely to be suitable for parish council car parks and the like, because people parking there are either going to be visiting the village hall or parish hall, perhaps residents locally, and maybe also near a sort of a road network. So perhaps somebody who wants to get a bit of a top up but is staying in the area for a while. Those are likely to be the most suitable, and they're the ones most commonly considered for publicly available chargers. So As a parish council, town council or community group, it seems an obvious question, but it is really important. You know, why do you want a charge point? They're not suitable for every location. There are costs involved, potentially. You don't want infrastructure installed that isn't going to be used. So, and at the moment, we're still in the early days of EV rollout. So, you know, asking yourselves, why do you want a charge point? Have you had residents in the area that have requested charging at your village hall? Is there a tourist destination nearby, or are you a tourist destination? Are you considering income generation possibly as a charge point? You know, these questions are really important for you to ask yourselves as to why. There's no requirement for you to provide charge points, but the interest in the use of them is now increasing. So now's a good time to be asking those questions. And one of the key issues, which kind of leads on from that, is the right charger in the right place. I mean, this is the phrase that's being used across the country, really, whether you're talking about motorways or village halls or councils or supermarkets. The right charger in the right place is really important. And that will be dictated by who will use the charger, how long are they likely to park, how long are they likely to want to stay, dwell times we call that. Is it a regular route? So is it likely that people who are not staying for long but perhaps are passing through might want to charge their cars? Are there nearby residential areas? Are there residents who have expressed an interest or could potentially be interested once, as I say, second-hand market increases and there's more interest in charge points? So that's some of the important questions to ask. And once you've kind of got beyond that, and maybe you're thinking, yeah, we do think we want charge points. Okay, what's the next steps? There's a lot of practical considerations. The charge points will need to be connected, will almost certainly need to be connected to the electricity network. There are some that you can attach to your own supply. That's a slightly different offering. So if you're looking at, and particularly for rapid chargers, you would need a separate connection because they need a not much bigger power supply. So what capacity is there close to where you're thinking of putting your charge points in? And how much would it cost to bring the supply to the charge point? So if your connection to the electricity network is a long way away or some distance away, then there'll be costs for putting that underground infrastructure in to connect it to the charge points. Generally, it tends to be as close as possible, but that's something else to bear in mind depending on the connection. There are issues with fire safety and insurance. We've had this raised in terms of proximity to buildings of charge points. They all come to with sort of certain British standards, so they are fire safe. But there has been concerns and issues raised in the press about fire safety issues, so it is something that needs to be borne in mind, particularly if you're considering having a charge point immediately adjacent or attached to a village hall or other building. Connectivity and mobile signal. The charge point equipment has to be able to connect to what's called the back office, because although the equipment itself, the electrical equipment, might function really well, if it can't connect reliably to the back office, there can be issues with the unit working effectively. So connectivity and mobile signal, also something to bear in mind. Accessibility, this is, well, there's lots of issues here potentially, but if you're thinking of making a charge point accessible for all users, possibly disabled users, there's various things to bear in mind for that. And some new charge point regulations came out in November, which are really just to make charge points work for the public. So, and then most of them are down to the charge point operator to comply with. So making sure the units are contactless if they're over a certain size, making sure that the price that you have to pay is displayed, various things like that. So any charge point installed, as I say, charge point operators primarily will be responsible for those, but it's worth bearing them in mind. So those are practical considerations, you know, and in many cases they're not a problem, but it's something that needs to be just borne in mind once you get to the stage of thinking, actually, we think we do want to do this. And there are financial considerations. So some councils, and I know some other bodies, have considered paying to put their own charge points in with a view to making money off them. And I think in the future that may be possible, but at the moment it can be quite difficult to cover the costs because you've got the infrastructure cost, you've got the cost of the equipment, you've got ongoing maintenance and back office costs. And because EVs were still at the relatively early days, although obviously the numbers are increasing quickly, it's difficult to justify. You're not likely to be making much profit, if anything, and there's quite a lot of risk if you take it on yourself. So that's why it's a good thing that the charge point operators are offering these fully funded models, because actually with those you don't have any of that risk. But it is something to bear in mind, because I know there's been conversations within some parish and town councils to whether to actually install themselves and make money. It's tough it's tough for that to work at the moment. Might in the future, but at the moment it's unlikely. So the costs involved: supply and installation, ongoing maintenance, repair and back office fees. As I say, if the charge point operator is doing fully funded, none of those are an issue. If you're considering doing it yourself, those things all need to be borne in mind. And obviously also, if you do want to try and make a profit and you're doing it yourself, then that could be an impact on the tariff that was charged to the user, because that's the only way you'll get any income from your charge point. So just some financial considerations. As I say, if you're going down the fully funded route, it's not a major issue, but if you're thinking of doing it yourselves, these are the kind of things you need to bear in mind.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Belinda. We're just going to have a little moment now to just have a look at the chat, see if there's been any unanswered questions in there that we can address. Lydia, is there anything for Belinda to answer?
Yeah, Belinda, there's just one that I think might be interesting for you to cover, and that was a question from Mike about where will the Levi installs be located?
Well, the pilot ones we're currently looking at, the pilot, as the name suggests, was a much smaller bid, because the government really wanted to look at innovation and see how it might work before they launched the main fund. So we were very keen to try and get them spread across the county. So we haven't managed in the pilot to have all the market towns included, but we've got a sort of smattering of potential locations in Hereford, Leominster, Kington, Ross. I think I'm right in saying those three. The main fund would be looking at locations across the county, not on third-party land. This was the discussion we had amongst the consortium, that the issues with the legalities of including third-party land in Levi for this round of funding might be different for future funding, but for this round, the legalities. So we haven't said exactly where yet, because we're still looking at potential sites with the charge point operator. Because even though, a bit like I said, with all the practical considerations, the same applies for on street or car parks for that matter. You have a site you look at, you think that might be suitable. And then when you start looking at it in detail, it might be, actually, it's not. We need to look around the corner. So we're still at the early stages with those. What we have based the list on is locations that were suggested by councillors, ward councillors and parish councillors. Actually, we sent emails out probably in 23 now, actually, but we've been having that dialogue about if anybody's got any suggested locations, please send them in. We've also got a location request form on the council website, so if any members of the public suggest sites. So our initial list was really made up mostly from those, where we'd had engagement from councillors saying, oh, can you look at my area, can you look at this area? And for the main fund, it was just a bigger version of that, but the request form is still on the web pages, so we're still looking for suggested locations. And once we've got a clearer idea, obviously we'll be engaging with sort of residents in the area and canvassing their opinions and looking at what might work and might not work. So I can't kind of give you a definitive list, but they are spread across the county.
Brilliant. Thank you, Belinda. And thank you, Mike, for the question. Is there anything else in the chat, Lydia, for Belinda to address at the moment, or anything that's not going to get covered later?
There's a couple that have come in that might be, we can go through them, or if not, we can pick them up at the end. But there's a question from Jonathan. Do you have an indication of what operators might pay? So he's been offered 1% of turnover, but not sure, if this is reasonable, is a sort of a benchmark.
It's a difficult one. There's different models. Some of them offer a kind of revenue share type model. Some of them might be looking at paying rent for the car park space, or possibly a combination of the two. Those tend to be the two most common. In terms of the percentage, that varies across the CPOs. I mean, charge point operators, sorry. Really, what you would need to do is probably talk to another one and see if you can get a comparable quote. I mean, as a council, obviously our procurement processes are quite long and drawn out and detailed, and so we have to go to a number of operators and see who offers the best deal. 1% sounds low, but I wouldn't like to say that that's unreasonable, especially as the thing you have to bear in mind is that the charge point operator is taking on a lot of cost to install the charge points. They don't have a guaranteed income. They're kind of installing on the basis that their revenue will increase. And I don't know how long their payback is for your particular location. So it's worth bearing in mind that, as I say, they've got a considerable investment to make. And so their payback is probably part of their business case. But the only way to really find out if that is a reasonable offer for your particular installation is to get another charge point operator, have a look and maybe see what they could offer. But a lot of that, as I say, is probably based on how long they think it'll take for them to sort of get their money back and start making a profit. And the bigger the contract, the more they're likely to offer. So perhaps for a small installation, offering a revenue share seems reasonable. But yeah, I would say the only way to check really is to go to another charge point operator and see what they would offer for your particular scenario.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Belinda, and thank you, Jonathan. There are a couple more questions just coming into the chat. Lyd, did you want to pick any of those out for Belinda at the moment?
There's one. How do we go forward from this? So do we contact the council or look to the private provider? But I think you're going to cover that anyway in the next few slides.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking if we should leave the rest of the questions for when we've gone through the next few slides, that might make the most sense.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Sounds like a good plan. Thanks, Belinda. We'll let you take it away again then. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so when we contacted you all about this webinar, we did ask for some feedback for any councils in Herefordshire, parish councils who'd actually contacted charge point operators, and a few of you have. We've just put a summary of responses there. We thought you might be interested to know what kind of things people were saying. Nobody yet has installed a charge point, which isn't surprising because it's not a quick process. So it does take a while to go through all the different issues involved. But it's interesting that a number have contacted charge point operators. Different reasons for not going ahead. Some of the ones that were quoted were that the site wasn't suitable. Perhaps the car park was a bit on the small side, so there were concerns about losing spaces to other car park users. That's assuming you want to restrict the bays that serve the charge point to EV drivers only, perhaps. Also, there were issues with land ownership. The land would need to be owned by whoever was applying or had the contract with the charge point operator, or at least have the landlord's permission. And then you get into issues with leases and things, as I said, with third-party land. So if you don't own the land, the organisation that's looking at the charge point operator for a contract, that can cause some issues. Electricity supply, one of the constraints we mentioned before. So interesting that a few parish councils have approached charge point operators, and as I say, it's just a case of working through, because you don't know really until you start looking at these things, except perhaps the land ownership, which obviously is something that you would already be aware of. But some of the other things, the other physical constraints, you won't know until a charge point operator comes out and has a look. So, but thank you for sending those in, and the survey is still open. So if anybody would like to send in any further information, the electric vehicles at herefordshire.gov.uk, any comments or further responses, just send them into there. We contacted all of you a couple of years ago, as I say, about the Levi funding and the possibility of including third-party land in the main fund that we're currently looking at. And we did have, over 20 expressions of interest. There is interest out there. And so one of the reasons we wanted to do this webinar was because we were aware that obviously we'd kind of suggested it and put out there that the Levi funding might possibly be an option, and then it wasn't. So we didn't want to kind of just leave it. We wanted to carry on the conversation and carry on the support. So, use the electric vehicles inbox email address if you've got any queries, or if you want to send in some more survey responses. But thanks to those who did. It's really useful and interesting to know what your experience has been to date, so that we can see if there's any elements that we can help with. So on to a case study, not in Herefordshire. This is Nottinghamshire, but it's just an example of a company that will look at sites, village hall car parks, as potential locations for fully funded charge point. We've got Amanda's contact details there for Believe. Obviously, the other charge point operators are available, but this was one that we could access in terms of the details. They'd got terraced housing nearby with no off-street parking, so I think there was resident support for charge points. There was recreation ground nearby, local schools. So there was quite a few of those. When we had the slide about, why do you want to put a charge point? Why do you think it might be useful? These are all the kind of things that were considered. Actually, this is going to increase the usage of this charge point and, really make it a valuable installation in that village hall. So, as I said, Believe supplied, installed, operates, manages it, maintains it. Doesn't cost the parish council anything, is what we've been told. Obviously, we haven't spoken to the parish council specifically, but I know with the fully funded models, part potentially from legal costs for the council, which would be down to them. Everything else in terms of the installation and supply and operation is done by the charge point operator. And to give you an idea of what the process looks like, this is some information that Believe sent us about the process that they went through with the parish council for that particular installation. So, and as I've already mentioned, you must own the land. There are issues with third-party land. So you must own the land. 15 to 20-year lease agreement. That's similar to what we're looking at with our sort of larger consortium projects. Charge point operators are looking for 15 plus years in order for them to recoup the money they've spent on the installation and investment cost and hopefully start to make a profit. So you would be looking at a long-term lease. So if you have a short lease on your building, that might be an issue. And it looks like in this particular example, they pay them a rental fee. So there's no mention here of revenue share. I don't know if there's any revenue share for this one, but they do pay a fee for sort of renting the bay. And the process, it's fairly obvious, I suppose, what they would go through. And you'll get this slide deck so you can have a look at them. But the CPO will come out and have a look. They'll do an initial check. They'll just make sure that all the basic things like land ownership and that are in place before they go much further. They'll have a look at the electricity supply. That's the DNO checks. And then if the parish council's like, yes, we're interested, they can start looking at are there any permissions that are needed, drawing up site plans. And then obviously once that's all approved and agreed, you'd be looking at organising a lease. And then the charge point operator would do the installation and they would cover all the ongoing maintenance and issues. So that's just a sort of basic process, but it would be similar. You'd contact a charge point operator, they'd come out and have a look, check a few of these really basic issues, move towards a design, is there capacity on the network, and then if everybody's happy, looking to install. I don't know how long this process took, but it's going to very much depend on, for instance, how long it takes for legal teams to sort out leases and things like that, availability of equipment, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm not sure how long the process would take, but it's not quick, but I would expect it to, I don't know, I'll stick my neck out and say, within 12 months, if everything is going, if there's no major hiccups, and obviously things like planning permissions and things like that can delay. So that's a sort of run through of the process. And this is another example. So I don't have a lot of information on this, but it was to give, you've got some links there, you can have a look, but it basically to give you an example of one where there was some money involved. So although this will generate revenue for the venue, in this case they're looking at sort of tourist destinations, there are some costs that the venue would have to put in that contribute towards the buying and installing the equipment. So this is an example of one where it's not fully funded by the charge point operator, but you do get some revenue, and obviously you'd be looking at a sort of payback period for that. So really this was just an example, and obviously there are one or two places in Hereford where this option's been taken up, and this is an example of an alternative where there is some cost involved, but a lot of the risk is still taken on by the charge point operator. So we're sort of coming towards the end of it now, really. We wanted to give you some next steps. I mean, since we started thinking about this webinar, we obviously had a change in government. The Levi funding that we're involved in is continuing, but we won't really know until the autumn statement what may be happening with funding going forward. The council also looks at fully funded models. Its charge point infrastructure is expensive, and so we also look to fully funded models. So we would be looking at what grant funding would be available from the government. I mean, one point I didn't make about Levi is that the government funding is only topping up what the charge point operators will be contributing. So we're expecting in the region of 80% investment from the private companies, and the government funding's just topping up the sort of 20%. But it means that the council isn't liable for those costs. They're all covered. So, as I say, waiting till the autumn statement to get a bit more information on what the government might be doing. So far, the indications are they're very supportive of EV infrastructure funding. So we are expecting some more funding announcements, but we don't know what they will be. And the on-street residential charge point scheme, which has been going for some years now, there's currently funding, but that ends in March 25, and obviously we don't know yet whether that will be continued. One of the issues with that scheme has been that it's been year-on-year funding, so unless you can kind of get the charge point bought, installed and signed off within a year, it's made some issues with trying to get the whole thing done quickly enough. And I think what we're hoping is that any future funding will have longer timescales so that people can actually take a bit longer to sort out what they're doing and apply for the funding. So what we would suggest in the meantime, while we wait for the government statement and we wait to see what happens with future EV funding and what we may or may not be able to help with the council, do approach charge point operators directly. We'll send a list round which is taken from the government website of charge point operators, but in the meantime you can just do an internet search. They'll come up. The Energy Savings Trust is a really useful resource. They run a lot of webinars, they offer a lot of advice and support, and they're running a series of webinars. They're free to attend, and they are specifically for sort of local authorities, town and parish councillors. So if you want a bit more background, and also they will have sort of the latest updates as well if there's been any announcements from government, have a look at those, attend those. I think they're really useful for background. And then, as I say, although we're waiting to see what government grants there'll be going forward, there are some that are currently available. The workplace charging grant, which I'll talk about a bit in fact, I'll go on to the next page. Workplace charging grant is the only one that's currently available that might be suitable for yourselves other than AUX. But as I say, the AUX fund finishes in March. So the workplace charging grant used to be for businesses, and it wasn't for publicly available charge points, but the rules have been changed, and now workplace charging scheme can be used for charge points that will be available to the public. It's based on a voucher scheme, so you can get up to sort of 75% of the funding for a socket for an installation, up to £350 per socket. And there's a whole load of different organisations that could apply for these vouchers, businesses, charities, public sector organisations. small accommodation businesses. So that is one that's worth having a look at. One of the requirements is, though, you must have off-road parking, so it's not suitable for any on-road. But if you've got car park, then that might be something worth looking at. And we've got the link in there that will come through with the slide deck to have a look on the government website if you're interested in that one. But as I say, we're going to wait and see what comes through from the government later this year. And some more useful resources. Obviously, there's our web pages. The focus of those obviously is on our charge points, what we currently have in the car parks, plans we have going forward. On the web pages, we've also got a link to the strategy, which I didn't mention there, but we have got a link to the strategy. There's also this form that you can complete if you've got suggested locations for charge points. And we've had quite a few of those that have come through, have said Village Hall car parks or various other. So any potential locations are welcome. We record all of those and they kind of get filtered through and added onto lists, as we're looking at potential locations. And we also have an EV drivers group, which we set up probably over 10 years ago when we first put the charge points in. And initially that was for EV drivers who would contact us with questions about our network or whatever. And we've kind of put all their names together in a group. They opt in. But if any of you are interested in signing up for that, you can do that through the council web pages or just email the electric vehicles and ask to opt in. What we tend to do is email the drivers group when we've got an update on our installation. So that would include information on, upcoming expansion for the car parks and also the on-street installations. So, anyone can sign up for that group. You don't have to be an EV driver. It's just somebody who's interested in all things sort of EV and EVI that might relate to infrastructure, that might relate to the council. Energy Savings Trust website is there, and Greener Footprints Initiative, who have helped us with this scheme and do various other green initiatives for the council. I think that's it.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Belinda. Thank you. That was really informative and great. We have got a bit of time left. So if you've got a question that hasn't been answered that you've already put in the chat, or if you've got anything else that you want to raise, then we can use this time to have a bit more of an open discussion. So do use that raise hand function if you've got anything burning that you'd like to ask, or feel free to still use the chat. Lyd, is there anything in the chat that we haven't already addressed?
There's just one. That's what impact will the new regulations have coming in November?
This is the public charge point regulations.
Yes, yeah.
They are primarily impacting on charge point operators. If you're thinking of installing a charge point and managing it and running it yourselves, then they would apply to your installation as well. But they're really to make sure that public charge points achieve certain levels of service. So reliability, 99% reliable, contactless if they are over a certain size. So all rapid chargers and some of the other fast chargers have to have contactless. The price for the tariff has to be advertised. It has to be on an open network so that anybody can kind of turn up and use the charge point. You don't have to be a member of a scheme, that sort of thing. So the regulations are to protect the public, really, to make sure that any charge points that are installed as publicly available actually do achieve a certain level. So, as I say, that's more of a concern. It's more of something that the charge point operators need to address. But obviously, if you have a charge point on your land, it's something you need to be aware of, and that the charge point operators will need to comply with those regulations. So again, you can look those up on the government website. It'll give you all the details. It's the public charge point regulations.
Great, thank you, and thank you for the question. Lyd, is there anything else? If not,
I don't think so. I may have missed out some, so I apologise if I have, but it might be best to go to the more of an open chat now if there is any questions, I think.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, if there's any questions, folks, just use that raise hand function. But as I said at the beginning, if there's anything that we haven't addressed, then we will be following up and making sure that we've covered that in the emails that will include the slides. And we have got a question from Vanessa. Vanessa, if you want to open up your mic and ask your question, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, if our village hall has a Herefordshire Council owned car park, would it be covered under the council car park scheme, so the WENEA scheme, or would it come under the levy funding?
Yeah, interesting question, Vanessa, because I wasn't aware of this car park until recently when Estates said we own a car park in Almerley Village Hall. So technically, I think it might be covered by the concession contract, but I need to check on that because if it's a council-owned car park, then it may well fall under the concession contract. But I need to get some clarification from Estates on that because obviously your situation there is unusual. It's not. It's not that common. So leave that with me, and I'll. We've got your contact details, haven't we? And I'll double check that and get you a definite answer one way or the other.
I don't think we filled in the survey. Actually, we didn't. I don't think we got that. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure our feedback will be in there.
Okay.
So if you want to send us the survey as well.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do.
Brilliant, thanks, Vanessa. Barry, you've got your hand raised. Would you like to go for it?
Our village hall has a very large car park, which serves the village hall, a large sports field and recreation ground, and is also used by patients attending the doctor's surgery across the opposite side of the road. We have been looking at this for some time.
Yeah.
But we are not looking for a facility that will make a profit. We simply want to provide a facility.
Yep.
But what I am concerned about, that came up in the conversation, is if we are providing it as a facility at no cost or no profit, what effect is that going to have on our village hall insurance, and how can we recover that extra cost?
Village hall insurance, has been raised by another village hall as well. I know it's something that would need to be mentioned to them. Whether it would affect your insurance premium or not, I don't know. It may be that if it's away from the building,
no, it will be on the wall of the building, because the car park comes right up to the wall of the building.
And are you looking for it to be connected to the supply of the building, or to have a separate, or had you not got that far with your thoughts?
No, we would have a separate meter.
Okay. You would need to speak to insurer to check. I know I spoke to somebody from a different village hall who said there were some issues with insurance if the unit is attached to the building. I think it's around fire safety, amongst other things. And you might find, I don't know if you've spoken to any charge point operators, but you might find that it is no cheaper, or that actually it makes no difference if the unit is freestanding away from the wall. So you'd need to speak to insurer to find out what the situation is, but it might be worth bearing in mind that if a freestanding unit would address that issue, then that would be a better route to go down. In terms of whether the council has any extra costs like insurance, again, that's a discussion you probably need to have with the charge point operator. And it may be that if they're renting the bay off you, that income from renting your parking bay would cover your extra cost of insurance. So you've got options by the sounds of it. You can look at a freestanding unit, that might improve the insurance. You can possibly have a conversation with a charge point operator and say, well, how do we cover these costs? I don't think any of that is set in stone. It's something that you can look at alternatives to see what the best option is.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Belinda. If anybody's got any more questions, we still have got some time. So do feel free. Vanessa, I see you've got your hand raised. You can jump back in.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I can think of 2 other village halls in our area which have got quite large car parks. I don't know what their status is, or whether you've been in touch with them or they know that this is going on. But Pembridge and Webley have both got significant car parks and are both on the black and white tourist trail.
Yeah.
So they would be worth having on your radar.
Okay, I think everybody got all the clerks anyway of the town and parish councils. I think they would have all got the invite, but we're going to send out, that we can send out the slide deck to all of them again if they're interested, and I could give them a nudge specifically, actually, Pembridge and Webley.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I think Webley, the village hall is completely separate to the parish council, so
right,
it just depends whether the two are talking to one another.
Yeah, I mean, that's land ownership is an issue. It has to be, the lease has to be with the sort of the landowner, otherwise you've got these third party agreements, which they're not impossible, but they are more complicated. So I think charge point operators probably prefer not to have those unless it's a really good site and they're like, actually we need to overcome this. But yeah, I will double check and see what information they were sent, and if they didn't receive anything, but we'll send a sort of follow out up to everyone. So that's great, thank you.
Great. Got another question from Lorraine. Lorraine, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in with your question. Lorraine, if you're having trouble unmuting, feel free to pop your question in the chat and we can address it there.
Right, okay. Let's try again. Hi, I'm just following up to the last point which is raised, and I'm representing Webley Village Hall and the Parish Council. So yes, we are on your radar and we have responded to your services. So yeah, it's something that we're currently looking at, but obviously, like, as with others attending today, we're just looking at the information to see which direction to go. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, that was another point that we wanted to make. I sort of made briefly at the beginning, was that there's no requirement for village halls to provide this. It's very much a case of if you perceive there's a need, if there's a number of reasons why you think it's a good idea, then we want to try and support you in that. But there's no there's no requirement if it's not something that's either practical or is felt that now is the right time. So that's fine.
Thank you.
Great stuff. And any further questions, do pop them in the chat or raise your hand. It's been really good to have these questions come through and have such an engaged session. Really pleased to have so many of you here and really engaging. We're really keen as well. Gordon, if you want to jump in with your question, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, it's Gordon Cobbock here. I'm just helping a group actually outside of Herefordshire who are trying to deal with a charge point operator that has basically gone bust. I'm just flagging the situation where they just have a legacy thing that was providing charge, but now the costs of changing to a different back office or trying to convince another back office company to take it over and are all looking much too high. So they're stuck really with a useless block with 2 charge points on it that isn't functioning, to everyone's frustration. So there is a rapid turnover of CPOs. So there's just something to be aware of, that maybe, I don't know, go for a bigger one that is likely to be still existing, or maybe have to discuss some ways that, I mean, if they go bust, then they probably won't, they'll just immediately go bust and they won't have any recourse to remove it in any case. But just flagging that is happening.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of echo what Gordon said, really. It is a very fast moving industry, and we're finding this with, looking at our sort of procurement for the really big contracts, that it's something that needs to be borne in mind, that companies are likely to sort of come and go. But there's some fairly big and well-established companies out there. So if they're showing any interest, I mean, you don't want to not support the smaller companies, but it is a risk, especially as, a small installation, perhaps in a rural area, is quite a risky installation. You're not talking about a big inner city install where they know they're going to make profits pretty quickly. It's quite a commitment to take on something in a more rural area, perhaps so. But the government, as I say, government website's got lists of their sort of authorised, for want of a better word, installers. So that's probably a good place to start, because at least they've had some vetting and had to jump through certain hoops in order to get on that list.
Yeah, it's all really, thank you, really good points. And we're really keen to hear from you if it's more of the same experiences, or, you know, slight variations in experiences. It's all really good and useful information for us. So whether it's now or via email, or just keeping in contact with us, we're really keen to hear from you. So do keep in touch. If there are any more questions, we'll just wait for any further questions to come through. Otherwise, we will start wrapping up the session. Thanks again so much to everybody for your attendance. And yet, just a reminder again that we will be sharing all of this information, the slide decks, and any questions that went unanswered, or topics that took pertinence. We'll be waiting to see what the central government funding announcements look like, and that will inform what we do next, and we'll keep in touch about that. But in the meantime, yep, follow up on those links that we'll be sharing, and do let us know how you all get on. For now, we'll leave the session there. Thanks again. Thank you, Belinda. Thank you, Lydia, and thank you all for your questions. It's been really great to have you all here today. Take care. Thank you very much.